It is the spring of 1915, and London breathes with the rhythm of distant war. The city hums as it always has. Trams clatter down soot-lined streets, paperboys call the latest dispatches from the Western Front, and shop windows still glow after dark. The Great War rages across the Channel, but for Londoners it exists in newspapers and telegrams, in photographs pinned to parlor walls, not in sound or sky. Men volunteer and disappear to the front. Women roll bandages, collect tin for munitions, and ration sugar. But the city itself remains untouched, proud, distant, insulated by the Channel and tradition. This is the capital of an empire. War, however bloody, does not touch the heart of the British Lion until the whispers begin. A new word slips into hushed conversations and letters from the coast. Airships, long as football fields, filled with hydrogen, and built not to carry passengers, but bombs. Monsters in the clouds, sent from the German Kaiser to burn cities in the night. At first, Londoners dismissed them. Fanciful inventions, the stuff of penny dreadfuls and scientific fiction. The very idea that a foreign machine could drift across the Channel and drop a fire onto British soil seems absurd. The Royal Navy watches the seas, and that has always been enough. But then come the reports. A fisherman in Norfolk sees something vast and pale in the moonlight drifting inland. A constable near Great Yarmouth claims to have heard an engine purring above the clouds. In Kent, a child finds a charred crater in a field, still smoking. The authorities offer no explanation. No one knows what to believe. But late at night, Londoners now glance upward. The sky, once a quiet dome of stars and smog, though feels unfamiliar. The front line is no longer only in Belgium or France. It may be overhead, and somewhere across the North Sea, a Zeppelin commander unfurls a flight plan. The target is marked in pencil, London. The German Zeppelin was unlike anything the world had seen, a floating leviathan of war, drifting silently through the upper reaches of the night sky. The LZ-class airships, named after their creator Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, were technical marvels for their time. Over 500 feet long and encased in a rigid aluminum skeleton, and they housed multiple engines and carried bombs suspended beneath their gas cells. Filled with highly flammable hydrogen, the airships were as vulnerable as they were terrifying. But their true power lay in their altitude and stealth. At over 10,000 feet, they could fly above most weather systems and far beyond the reach of contemporary aircraft or anti-aircraft guns. In the stillness of the night, they passed overhead like phantoms, engines muffled by distance and cloud, casting no more than a dim outline across the moonlit sky. German strategists believed these monstrous craft could shift the course of the war, not by destroying armies, but by striking the psyche. Britain's strength came from its people, its factories, and its stubborn morale. If the heart of London could be made to burn, perhaps the resolve of the British Empire would tremble. The Zeppelin crews, drawn from Germany's naval and military elite, trained in the technical rigors of altitude flight. Encased in thick leather, their breath fogging inside freezing gondolas, they flew blind much of the time, navigating by compass, guesswork, and flickering lamplight. On the night of May 31st, 1915, two such skyships, LZ-38 and LZ-37, prepared for a mission that would mark the beginning of something new in modern warfare. Their target, the City of London. Final checks were made as the massive vessels rolled from their hangars near Brussels. Beneath their bellies hung clusters of bombs, some high explosive, others incendiary. The mission was not to strike military bases or ports, but homes, shops, streets. The orders were clear: cause disruption, spread terror, make the British people feel the reach of the Reich. As dusk fell, the airships began their slow ascent, climbing into the purple skies above Flanders, heading for the Channel. Below them, soldiers manned trenches. Civilians slept. But above, the age of strategic bombing was quietly underway. The engines sputtered to life beneath the creaking frames of the LZ-38 and her sister ship as they began to rise into the night sky above occupied Belgium. It was May 31st, 1915, and the air was cold and still, perfect for what was to come. Slowly, the Zeppelins ascended above the Flemish fields, climbing to their cruising altitudes over 10,000 feet. These were not guided missiles, not aircraft with onboard radar or reliable radios. The men aboard relied on little more than compass bearings, map references, and glimpses of moonlit coastlines below. Navigation was a constant exercise in guesswork. With no electronic aids, the commanders plotted courses using visible landmarks, river bends, towns, rail lines, each one a fragile point of certainty in the black, featureless night. Wind drift was an ever-present enemy. A shift in current could blow a Zeppelin dozens of miles off course before the crew even noticed. In the darkness above the channel, cloud cover often swallowed the stars. When that happened, the men navigated by instinct, charting speed against time, praying their heading was true. The slightest mechanical failure could doom the mission or the airship. And yet these ships pressed on, silent titans floating over a continent torn by war. As they neared the British coastline, the Zeppelins dipped lower, punching through cloud to confirm their position. Below them lay the sleeping villages of Norfolk. A farmer outside the hamlet of Holt, tending to a restless animal, looked up and caught sight of something massive and pale gliding across the stars. No sound, just a slow, majestic shape, like a floating cathedral. Within moments, it disappeared behind a ridge. The airships followed the curve of the coastline, then adjusted south, toward the lights of London. They would strike from the northeast, entering the city's airspace in the early hours of June 1st. Inside the gondola of the LZ-38, the bombardier signaled readiness. His target list had been memorized: areas of dense housing in Stoke, Newington, and Shoreditch, and transport lines in Hackney. He opened the bomb bay doors. The first bombs were a mix: high explosive to punch through roofs and walls, and incendiaries designed to ignite fires. The crew leaned into their straps as the Zeppelin released its deadly cargo. Thus, far below in narrow London streets, windows shook. Some residents woke to the sound of glass shattering. Others saw nothing but orange flashes in the distance. For the first time in history, aerial war had come to the heart of a modern capital, and it had arrived without warning. It was just after 11 p.m. when the first bomb hit the heart of northeast London. It tore through the roof of a two-story row house on Ulcombe Road in Stoke, Newington. Inside, a family of 5 had been asleep. The father was killed instantly. The mother, cradling her baby, was blown through the front window and into the street, surviving only by chance. Doors were torn from their hinges. Gas lamps exploded into flame. A second bomb landed moments later, this time on a small match factory, its wooden structure igniting in seconds. The night erupted into fire and confusion. People staggered into the streets in their nightclothes, screaming, some barefoot, others clutching whatever they could: blankets, children, heirlooms. Londoners, who for centuries had known war as something fought overseas, were suddenly exposed to a new kind of violence. There was no warning, no siren, no sense of where the danger would fall next. The idea of death coming from the sky was, until that moment, unthinkable. What struck many survivors wasn't just the destruction, it was the sound. Witnesses would later describe an eerie, droning hum that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, like the resonance of a giant organ. Then silence, then thunder. The blasts came seconds apart, each one punctuated by the high whine of tearing metal and the low, wet sound of collapsing stone. Rooftops were punched in. Chimneys fell like dominoes. Whole blocks lit up as incendiary devices ignited roof timbers and furniture. Flames leapt from building to building, carried by the wind. The London Fire Brigade rushed to the scene, but the number of strikes across the boroughs overwhelmed their reach. In Shoreditch, hoses froze or lost pressure. Firefighters dragged unconscious residents from smoke-choked stairwells, while others worked with bare hands to dig survivors from rubble. By midnight, the city skyline glowed a dull orange. In the darkness above, searchlights clawed at the sky, sweeping back and forth, trying to catch a glimpse of the intruder. Occasionally, a pale shape would emerge in the beams, a massive cigar of silver, ghost-like, drifting silently. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire, barking into the clouds. Shells exploded well beneath the Zeppelins, whose captains adjusted altitude at will, rising out of range like mythic beasts. The city's defenses were crude, built for a land invasion, not for shadows in the sky. In desperation, the Royal Flying Corps scrambled a handful of biplanes from fields outside the city. But their engines were cold, and their instruments primitive. Pilots ascended blind into the night, with no radar, no ground control, and barely enough power to reach the Zeppelin's altitude. One pilot, Lieutenant Reginald Warnford, later recalled the sky as an ocean of black glass. The airmen flew toward firelight, guessing, hoping to cross paths with the raiders. None did. The Zeppelins moved too slowly to chase, and too high to reach. Below, the chaos continued. In Hackney, a tram was overturned by a near miss. Its operator was found dead beside the controls. In Dalston, a chapel collapsed during a prayer vigil. The press would later call it the night the heavens turned hostile. And yet, amid the horror, there was a strange, hypnotic awe. Civilians who caught sight of the Zeppelins, when the moonlight hit just right, described them as ghost-wa, les drifting through the stars, ethereal and impossibly vast. One man likened them to cathedrals adrift. They had no face, no engine roar, just the quiet certainty of death suspended in the sky. For the people of London, the war was no longer distant. It had risen above their rooftops, looking down without mercy. By 1:30 a.m., with their bomb bays emptied and the city below burning, the Zeppelins banked eastward and slipped quietly back into the night. The silence returned just as it had been broken, gradually, unnervingly. Searchlights still raked the clouds, and anti-aircraft crews fired sporadically into nothingness, their ears ringing from hours of fruitless shelling. British interceptors, having failed to make contact, returned to base low on fuel and frostbitten. The defenders were left grasping at ghosts. The airships, having moved high above the effective range of the guns and far beyond the reach of pursuing fighters, vanished into the fog, retreating toward their bases in occupied Belgium. Not a single Zeppelin had been brought down. As dawn crept over the soot-streaked skyline, Londoners emerged, arced from basements, crypts, and railway arches, to find entire streets reshaped. Fires still smoldered in Shoreditch and Whitechapel. The morning's headlines did not hesitate. "London is no longer safe," declared the Daily Mail. Official reports counted 28 dead, over 100 wounded. Dozens of homes were destroyed. A school had been leveled. A hospital struck by a glancing blast had to evacuate its patients into the freezing street. The psychological toll, however, dwarfed the physical. For the first time in history, a capital city far from any battlefield had been bombed from the sky. In Berlin, the mood was triumphant. Photographs of London's burning skyline were passed among officers. The raid had proven something unthinkable just months before, that German airships could bypass the vaunted Royal Navy, cross the Channel, and strike at the very heart of the British Empire. Propaganda ministers seized the moment. Posters went up. "Zeppelins over London, the Kaiser's reach is long." Though the raid's military value was limited, its psychological impact on both sides was enormous. The age of total war had begun. The bombing of London jolted the British government into immediate action. What had once been theoretical fears were now undeniable realities. Their capital could be attacked from the sky, and they had no effective means of stopping it. Within days of the raid, emergency meetings convened across Whitehall. The War Office commissioned rapid improvements to air defense. Sound detection stations were expanded along the coast, using arrays of giant concrete listening dishes to detect the low drone of airships approaching in the dark. Powerful carbon arc searchlights were deployed in rings around key cities. Anti-aircraft gunners, previously untrained for aerial targeting, had received crash instruction on elevation fire and coordination. The Royal Flying Corps, still in its infancy, faced perhaps the greatest challenge. Their aircraft were fragile, open-cockpit biplanes, with limited endurance and unreliable instruments. Flying at night was dangerous under the best conditions. Intercepting an invisible target at altitude bordered on impossible. But necessity drove invention. Modified planes were equipped with upward-firing Lewis guns. Airfields installed dim lighting systems to guide landings under blackout conditions. Slowly, a doctrine for night fighting began to emerge. Each subsequent raid exposed flaws in the defense grid, but each also sharpened Britain's response. Despite this progress, the Zeppelins remained a serious threat through 1916. Their altitude and stealth still gave them an edge, and every mission brought more destruction. Cities lived under curfew. Civilians watched the skies. Fear of the airship, these silent behemoths drifting above the clouds, had taken hold, and in that fear, a new kind of warfare was being born. It began with whispers in the night, and ended in firelight over rooftops. The Zeppelin raids of 1915 were not just a new tactic, they were a new philosophy of war. For the first time in history, the capital of a great empire learned that distance from the front lines offered no protection. Children would soon be taught to dive under beds. Mothers would rush their families into cellars at the sound of engines overhead. Air raid sirens would become a fact of daily life. The Zeppelin was a crude instrument by modern standards, but its psychological effect was immense. It made civilians into targets. Though the airships would fade, replaced by faster, deadlier machines, their legacy endured. The idea that the sky itself could turn against a city would echo through time. When the Luftwaffe returned, it over London in the 1940s, dropping thousands of tons of bombs in the Blitz. It wasn't the first time the capital had burned from above. It had happened before, on a clear May night in 1915, when a shadow crossed the moon and war came silently from the clouds. The age of strategic bombing had begun.